All right. Good morning. We're here today to have a conversation with Ashton Rodenhiser, which is the founder. She's the founder of Mind's Eye Creative Consulting. And the website for that is mindseyeCreative.ca. I think a good summary for it is it's about illustrating ideas. And we'll have that in the show notes as well as some other links. So thanks for talking today. And how are things going where you are?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here. And the sun is shining. It's a little chilly, but the sun is shining, so I can't complain. Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
So by the CA in your website, everybody can see you're from Canada.
Yes.
Is that
Yeah.
where you were born and where you've always been?
I live about less than a half an hour away from where I grew up. I grew up on one side of a small town. I live now on the other side of that same small town. So I didn't go very far. I did live in the city for a little while. Lived in another little small town for a little while, but I love it here, and I'm happy to be able to raise my kids and have family life in rural Nova Scotia. It's a good place to be.
Nice. Is it
Yeah.
usually cold there then? Or I guess cold is relative.
Yeah, I think we are surrounded by the ocean here. You pretty much, don't have to drive more than an hour to hit the ocean in any direction where I am. So it can be a bit cold, I think, just because we're so close to the ocean. So yeah, this time of year it's starting to get a little chilly, but I also call it my time of year where I'm in a lot of denial because I just try to get away with wearing a sweater and it just doesn't cut it. In
Hmm.
a week or two, I'm gonna have to. I'll finally be out of the denial and have to get my jacket. But for now, I'm just gonna see how long I can ride it out, just getting away with a sweater.
All right. I'm in Florida, and when it gets
Mm,
around 70 degrees Fahrenheit, then I call that Florida cold, and I have to start
right.
wearing a hoodie or something. So it's a little different than growing up a little farther north. Grew up in
Yeah,
Virginia,
it's just what
and
you
it was
get
much
used
colder.
to. I was saying to my kids the other day how, right now it feels really cold, but in January, this is going to be considered a very beautiful day, right?
Mhm.
So you just kind of have to readjust to it again. But yeah, there's only usually a few weeks of the year that it's so cold that going outside is quite painful. But other than that, it's not too bad.
I was in Alaska for a
Mm,
military thing probably 10 years ago out in Galena, Alaska. They run the Iditarod through there, and I think it was an Air Force base or something there that's in caretaker status now. So it's not a
mm,
military base anymore. It's just an airstrip,
mm,
but a very nice airstrip. And we were doing a thing called Arctic Care there, where you take veterinarians
mm,
and eye doctors and medical doctors, and they go to the with the Tanahal, I think it's Tanahal Chiefs Council, and they go to
mm,
different towns up there. And from the lodge to the place, like the gym where you work out, was probably 100 yards, maybe a little less than 100 yards. But the road was all icy, and it was cold because it was Alaska, and it was in the maybe not the full winter, but getting close to it.
yeah.
And I was like, I can make it there in just my workout clothes. I'll be all right. And about halfway there is when I realized that I was going to die on the way to the gym.
Oh my
And I was like,
gosh.
this is what this is like. This is how it ends, because you
Yeah.
couldn't run because you were on ice, but
Yeah.
you couldn't get there any faster. And it was
Right.
probably maybe negative 20 or negative 40 Fahrenheit. So it was a bad idea to go out there without a
Wow.
jacket or anything on.
Wow.
But yeah,
Yeah. Just a little bit.
yeah, good times,
Yeah.
the military. All right. So you started this thing called Mind's Eye Creative Consulting.
Mhm.
How'd that come about? When'd you do it and why?
Yeah, so I sort of was introduced into the idea of visualizing conversation 10 years ago. And I learned about this thing that exists in the world as a facilitator. So I would often find myself in rooms and groups with people having conversation about something that they're working through, whether it be their strategic direction for the organization or company, or some sort of business brainstorming, or something along the lines of getting towards some sort of goal by having that conversation with the folks in the room. And after doing that for several years and really, really loving group process and how you can really hold a space and create a space where people feel valued, heard, and listened to, I was introduced into the world of graphic facilitation. And I didn't even know what it was at the time. And kind of took like a 1 day intro course, like I said, 10 years ago. And as cliche as it sounds, the rest was history. And I really fell in love how I could have the same impact with groups of people, but more in a visual way. And I started experiencing just for myself in some groups that I was facilitating, the power of visualizing ideas I can have on that group. And yeah, so that's sort of where I kind of got to today, just really deciding to go all in and doing it in a professional way and working with diverse groups of people and conferences and things like that. So, yeah, I've listened to a lot of conversations and presentations over the years. And yeah, grateful to kind of be here still 10 years in and working and doing cool doodles for a living.
So being a live illustrator, then that means you're going into a meeting, and while they're just doing their normal meeting, you're recording those ideas more visually than letters.
Mhm. Yeah, so I think there's always a purpose as to why I'm there. So, the when you said, you just go into the meeting, it's a little bit more than just kind of hopping into it, usually completely blind. Usually, I like to understand what it is that the visual is going to do for folks in the moment and after, right? How do they plan on using this visual after the event? Is it as an accountability tool? Is it to try to help the conversation move after? Like, how are they planning on using it after? And then also, what's the purpose in the moment? It might be more so just to kind of keep people all on the same page or allowing people to feel valued and heard in the space. Or they might ask me to play a more facilitator type role and ask for clarification and kind of connect with people a little bit more specifically in the meeting. So I can have as much or as little involvement. I can be more of a fly on the wall and just sort of listen the whole time, or I can take more of an active role in the planning. Sometimes people will ask me to be involved in creating the agenda with them because I have that expertise as well, and making sure that what it is that, like, that I know what I'm going to be potentially hearing or what I'm supposed to be listening for and things like that. So, but I also, sometimes get last minute requests like, can you come to our meeting next Friday? And you're like, okay. And you have no idea what's going to happen when you walk into the room. So yeah, it can be very, in terms of my involvement pre, during, and after, it definitely varies. But because most people think in pictures and a lot of people have visuals as a preferred way of learning, it definitely resonates with the majority of people in the room. And you're able to kind of see you're learning and see the connections as people are saying different things. Um, and then with COVID, of course, not being able to be in person anymore, I ended up moving a lot of my work online and being able to support people in a virtual way as well, which has been really kind of a blessing in disguise for me and really nice to be able to offer my services in person or virtually.
So when you're in the meeting, are you up front doing the illustrations, or are you to the side or to where they can't see you? I guess it depends on the meeting then.
Yeah, it definitely depends on the meeting, but it is really important for people to be able to see what it is that I'm doing, right? Because if let's say you're having a conversation and you're hearing someone say something, they're able to look over to what I'm doing and I'm like in view. So, and then they see I'm drawing a picture or I'm writing words to what the person is saying in the moment because it's all real live, right?
Hmm.
So they hear what they're saying, they look over to me, they see what they're saying, and it just helps solidify it from a memory retention in their brain, right? It's like the double like aspect of the learning, right? And that engagement and that deeper understanding of that information, right? So it's usually very important for me to be able to be visibly seen so that people can experience the extra benefit of that deeper understanding as they're hearing that conversation at the same time. So when I'm in person, usually that means I have like, a giant piece of paper on a wall, or I bring and I make my own wall and I'm doing it with markers and paper on a giant wall. So it could be like 4 feet wide by 8, 10, 12, 20 feet long, depending on the meeting or how many days this thing's going on for. Usually I just like, end up wrapping my paper all, taking the artwork down off the walls and wrapping my paper all around the edges of the room. So when I'm in person, I'm able to do that. Or if people want it digital and they can project it on a screen, that's an option. And then when I'm doing it virtually, people can see my drawing unfold in like a Zoom window or something like that, so that people can really experience the extra benefits of being able to see it live from like a, brain science thinking perspective. That makes sense.
Yeah. So it's not just a review thing where you look at it at the end and go, this is what we talked about. You see it
Yeah.
kind of be made while you're talking.
Yeah, yeah, and some people prefer just to kinda let me show, like, during breaks or at the end of the day or something like that, but it is really nice when people can kinda see the drawing unfold and, like, they see every little mistake that I make and I spell something wrong, I erase something or what have you. They get to see it all, right? Which, I'm kinda used to at this point because 'cause you're not perfect and you're gonna spell stuff wrong and you're gonna draw something a little funky that you have to erase and redo or what have you, but, I think that's what kind of also is, like, special about it, is the imperfection of it as well.
What's your favorite surface to draw on?
Yeah, oh my gosh, there's just pros and like, I really love paper and markers because there's something about the tangibility and being able to, like, actually touch and feel your own thinking that you just don't get in everyday life. There's just that the tangibility of paper is just so beautiful. But the flexibility that digital provides is so nice, being able to move things around and erase
Mm.
easily. And like mistakes are like, they don't matter at all on digital because you can just change things, and paper is like pretty permanent. It's annoying to change mistakes. You can, but it's annoying too. So I really love both for their own pros and for their cons. Like I love paper because of the constraint, but I also love digital because of doesn't there is no constraint, right? So, and sometimes it's really nice to actually have that constraint. Yeah, so it's kind of it's a hard one to answer because I really love both for their very own unique ways of working. Yeah.
That makes me think about in school when you go from the larger pencil in kindergarten or wherever, and then you go to the regular size number two pencil.
Right. Yeah.
But also when you go from wide rule notebook paper to college rule,
Mm,
and then you go from pencil to pen. That happened like middle school or high school, where you
right.
just felt like it was marking a milestone of now you're grown up and you're writing in a more permanent
Right.
thing, so you can't make as many mistakes. But that is it is a good point where you have that connection to what you're doing in the
Mm,
physical of paper and marker versus doing online or something. I'm not even sure
mhm.
how much they do that in school now. Like, do they do handwriting as much as they used to, and
Mhm.
or do they teach this type of thing in school for note taking?
Yeah. Yeah, it's I know that depending on where you are in the world, or even like here in Canada, province to province or territory, it's so different. It's like the way that teachers go about teaching note taking is varies gravely, and it's sketchnoting as a term for personal visual note taking is something that I'm really passionate about trying to get into the hands of students, because I feel like they go from, and I'm experiencing this with my own kids as they're starting to get older, they do a lot of drawing pictures and things to explain their learning before they have a lot of the words. And then it seems to be a very like drastic change to no pictures. They don't want them drawing anything to writing everything in words, right? So I'm trying to, in my own way, kind of get the idea of sketchnoting, like, don't get rid of the pictures. Like, the pictures are still really important and really useful, right? You can still keep the words and develop the words and learn how to write and spell and do all those things. But I'm not sure why they just sort of like just graduate so um it's just like a 360 or 180 or whatever it is. It's just like,
Yeah.
now we're not going to do any pictures. And I feel like we're doing students such a grave disservice by removing the pictures, because doodling can help you remember up to 29% more information. So by removing a doodle or a little picture to help you remember that information, like, the science is there that says it's helping us. So why are we removing the pictures? And I don't know if it's because it's seen as juvenile or not serious. So we couldn't possibly draw a picture to something that's supposed to be serious, you know? Whereas I find it's those moments where the the information is so important that it deserves to have a little drawing or a doodle to help elevate it and to help you remember it, and connect to it. And I find, yeah, it's just such an interesting, it's just such a dramatic change for students here, anyways, what I'm experiencing with my kids. And like, my oldest is 10 and she's in grade 5, and they're learning note taking skills now. So that tells me that's sort of the demographic of kids that I should really be connecting with, because they should be given ID, like just the option, even if they don't want to do it, but the option of being able to still include drawings into their note taking. And how does that work for them in their
Maybe
learning?
there's some truth to the idea that school was made to crush the creative mind and make a docile, rule following factory worker. And,
How much
and
time do we have to talk about this? I'm just kidding.
I've seen that. I've seen
I
that
could
stuff
talk about
before.
that all day long. That's
Oh,
my
so you subscribe to that theory then?
thing. Well, it's a hard one. I like, art is it's just been taken out of the classroom, and I think we've just done students and kids such a grave disservice by putting art into like that's a nice to have. It's not a must have. And what are companies looking for now when we can automate everything? They're looking for
Yeah.
creative thinkers, right? But you've taken creativity away. So where are all those creative thinkers that you so desperately would like to have? It's a tricky one. And for some reason we just sort of still look at creatives or art students, I mean, like, put them down, and I don't know why that is. It seems ridiculous, because there's many art forms that we absolutely are obsessed with, right? Like Hollywood and
Yeah.
acting and things like that, and musicians. Like, I was trying to ask someone to explain to me this whole Taylor Swift phenomenon recently, because I don't get it myself. Because, it's just such a weird contrast between the, like, Hollywood Swift movement, and then there's like everybody else, which you can't make any money on, right? Because that's what everybody says. Can't make money as an
Mm.
artist. And I'm like, well, tell that to like all these other artists that are doing really well. So why is it that we segregate like what we appreciate in our art communities? I just find that really fascinating, for sure.
Maybe that's something we learn in school growing up, is your when you start to do the doodles, it's because your mind's wandering, I think, or you're struggling to still listen. You want to be engaged, and they tell you it's wrong. So then you have this internal battle now through adulthood of you want to do this creative stuff, but you're told that that's not what you're supposed to be doing. You're supposed to be, hitting the 9 to 5 job and doing
Right.
this and following these directions. So
Yeah.
maybe that's, hmm,
We'll figure out the whole world by the end of this conversation, maybe, but
yeah.
yeah,
I,
it's
I, hon-
definitely, yeah. And I find most people that I encounter, because of what it is that I do, like, one of the number one things that people say to me all the time is, "I'm not creative," or "I could never do that." And I'm like, "But you could, and you are," like,
hmm,
and the only difference is between me and them is that, I had someone tell me that I wasn't creative, and I just had to rewire my brain to convince myself that I was, as an adult, right? And most people don't do that, or they just make a belief and they don't even analyze where that belief came from and then say, is this actually true? But we tend to like separate ourselves from like those who are creative and those who are not. And I think we're all creative in our own way. It's just a matter of finding what creativity means to you, because it's what makes the world go around. It's why we have everything. That's why we're
yeah,
talking here today on technology, and yeah, I just find it such a funny thing when people just sort of write themselves off as not creative. It's very frustrating when I hear that, for sure. Yeah.
yeah. You have to exercise that creativity. And if you don't, then you start to believe you don't have it anymore. It's kind
Yeah.
of like growing up, we played Legos. The staple toys were Legos, G.I. Joe, the action figures, and
Yeah.
Transformers. Those are the three
Right.
big ones. There were other ones, but
Yeah.
those are the big three. And I tried to do that, like play Legos again. Maybe the last time was probably 10 or 15 years ago. And I was like, man, I don't have the attention span for this anymore.
Mm,
Like before,
right.
you could just sit there and put the blocks together for hours on end and
Right.
still want to do it. And now I've been brainwashed into you got to do this stuff that's productive for work,
Yeah.
and you don't have time for this stuff. So,
Yeah. It's funny too, because when I'm doing sessions with people in person, a lot of times I'll have like a facilitator work with me. And one thing that she always does is bring slinkies and fidget spinners and Play Doh and stuff and puts it on the table just as like an option. Because a lot of folks, especially those with like ADHD, or they're more of like a kinesthetic learner, like they need to be doing something with their hands. Right. And usually we don't even let them know that we're going to bring them, because if we do, they go, oh, well, this is serious work. We can't have toys on the table. But we
mhm.
just put them out, right? And we don't really say much about it. And we can say, oh, there's things there. If you want to play around, go for it. And it's always the most senior leader or leaders in the room that tend to pick them up first, right? Whereas I think we would think
Hmm.
the opposite, right? But they're the ones that, like, I remember I was in a meeting not that long ago, and like without even missing a beat, um the head person there, he just like immediately picked something up and was walking around the room playing with this like little fidget thing or whatever. Right. And even though we were having a very serious conversation, and we were, told ahead of time, like this thing could go sideways at any moment. It was a bit risky in how we designed the conversation, because we had to like call out some things that, as like a third party, you can like call out things, and it's really great
Hmm.
because you don't have like any skin into the game. So you can be like, we're just going to say the elephant in the room here and actually have a conversation about what it is we need to do. And we had the tough conversations, and people were able to also open their mind and be creative and playful while doing it, right? And I think that's really important, to be able to offer things like that. But you know I think also it's not every day you get to like be in a meeting with some like drawing pictures and like being able to play with some fidget spinners while also getting some
Yeah.
pretty serious work done and having some serious conversations.
I wonder how much of that, where the more senior people do it, is because they're trying to set an example versus hopefully those are the ones that have the more creative, maybe not the more creative intrinsically, but just have more time to be creative because they're not thinking, nose to the grindstone, let me do this spreadsheet or figure
Right.
this other thing out. They have the time to back up and see the bigger picture.
Yeah, and or they're like, who are they there to impress? Right? Like they're
Hmm.
the top, so you don't need to really impress anybody, you know what I mean? So, I think, like, my experience when I see them pick up the toys and things, they don't even like, it's not even a thought. They're just like, "Oh, cool," and they pick it up and they play, right? Whereas maybe someone who isn't the senior leader in the room, they're like, "Well, I don't know if I should pick it up because I might not how am I gonna be perceived if I'm playing with this fidget spinner during this meeting?" But if you see, like, the boss do it, you're like, "Oh, well, then it's okay then," you know? It can be very frustrating sometimes when I'm doing these situations where they're like, "Oh, well, make sure you don't draw a silo or make sure you don't draw this because so and so hates that term." And you're like, "Oh my goodness, like, who is this meeting for? Is it for you just to like check a box? Or you
Yeah.
like gonna have?" And like I was in a meeting last week and they're like, "Don't say silo, don't do it." And we're like, "Okay, fine." And
I
then
wouldn't say
people
it. I would
said it
just
on the
draw them everywhere.
and people were on the panel saying silos, like, they were saying all the words that they told us to make sure that we don't say. I just thought it was so funny, right? Because, like, it's not like yeah, okay, silo is, like, overused, and we could totally do, like, buzzword bingo for sure and
Yeah. Yeah.
hit all the words that nobody really likes, but you kind like, a silo is a silo is a silo. If you're working individually and you don't understand the bigger picture, which was what we were talking about that day, it's kind of important. And yeah, silo might be an overused word, but sometimes cliches or overused words are there for a reason, right? We use them for a reason.
I wonder if you could use a thing like that to kind of bring a group together, and instead of calling it a silo, you call it a Cylon, and then you draw a picture of a Cylon, and they're like, what's going on here? And now they all have this inside joke, and they don't have to say
Yeah,
silo anymore. But it
yeah,
definitely aggravates the person that doesn't like it when you're talking
yeah.
about Battlestar Galactica and Cylons.
Yeah, I do love to infuse humor into my work, and when people like, even if it has nothing to do with specifically the conversation, but if someone said a funny joke or, like, everybody laughed at a thing, I also like to listen in on those things and
Mm.
incorporate images and quotes or whatever into what it is that I'm drawing. And because when you can add in like an emotion or humor into something, you're going to remember it. It's going to be memorable, right? So I do, even though maybe someone who wasn't at the meeting, they'll be like, why is this random little drawing on this? They might not understand. But for the people that were there in that room, when they look at it, they'll go, oh, right, when someone said that and it was so funny, blah, 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 right? And helps
Mm.
them remember the feeling that they had in that meeting. And if you can tap into people's emotions and how they feel, and if I can do that by drawing a picture of something that they might have felt, right? That's just more connection to that time that they spent together and how meaningful it was for them.
In your work of doing this, do you have a background in linguistics or like looking at different types of written communication, or what have you learned just about different written communication because of what you do?
Yeah, well, to be honest with you, written communication is not really my jam. It's more verbal. So, because I'm listening to everything and I'm translating and synthesizing information that I'm listening to, it's less about what I'm reading, or if that makes sense. So, like, if even if someone gives me something written that I have to try to figure out how to draw a picture for, I will, like, get the computer to, like, read it to me.
Mm.
Because
Okay.
my brain is so wired now to prefer to listen to something and draw it from listening to it, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Is there a word for that? Like back in the day, you would have somebody say they're going to take dictation. So you're going to speak and they're going to put it into words. Do you
Yeah.
do pictation where you draw pictures, or
Oh
is
my
there another
god,
word for
I
it?
love that term, that's really fun. There is a few different ways that people like to describe it. Graphic facilitation when you're in a meetings, and there's multiple voices. Graphic recording for like more presentation. You're kind of just like you're listening and you're drawing and you're not involved in what's happening. You're just like
Mm.
translating. Um, and visual storytelling, educational sketching. Oh, there's sketchnoting, visual note taking, visual representation. I've kind of heard it all. I'm always curious to hear how people like to describe what it is what I do. Um, I don't call myself a graphic designer. I'm not a graphic artist. Graphic design has a very specific idea when you say the word graphic design. So that's not what I'm doing. Everything is hand drawn and everything is based on what I'm hearing and listening to rather than like, like graphic design is like a logo or a website or like images to convey a message that is different than what I'm doing, which is about the conversation. Um, and the key part is that synthesization. So it's not necessarily dictation or translation or straight translation because you have the thinking. It's not just listening and drawing. You have the thinking, the understanding that's happening. So when someone says something at the beginning of the day and then at the middle and at the end, and they all like connect, I have to make sure that I make those connections on the page virtually
Mm.
or on paper, right? So that people can see how ideas connect together through like the course of an hour or a day or what have you, right? So it's that synthesizing and listening to understand that is a bit unique and different than just like straight translation or straight note taking, like on a computer or something like that. It's helping build and bridge connections and the synthesization of that information.
So does that mean that it would you would understand the illustration better if you were in the meeting rather than if you just saw an illustration of a meeting? Or does it just
It's
depend?
Yeah, it's definitely gonna have more impact for the people that were there, definitely, because they'll pick up on nuances of maybe things that I've captured that someone who after an event wouldn't understand. But if I know ahead of time, preferably, that this is going to be shared to people, that it was really important that it's going to be shared to people who weren't there, then I might add more detail than I
Mm.
normally would. Like I might end up using a lot more words to try to describe something to knowing that people we're going to be looking at this later and I need to maybe make those connections and add more words so that they don't miss the little nuances of things that maybe the people in the room um, would have gathered, if that makes sense.
It does. Have you considered using it in like a courtroom? So you have the court artist that does
Mm,
just a picture of what's going on, but then you have this illustration of what happened in court that day with
mm.
that picture. What kind of impact do you think that would have for just somebody looking at
Uh,
that?
it's an interesting one. I've never really considered it. Um, I think I think I would be very wary if it was to be shared because in those
Mm.
situations, no matter how much you like to think you can put your bias aside, there's a good chance that
Mm.
you're going to lean one way or the other. And so you might capture things that are going to lean one way or the other. Like you're like, no, he's definitely guilty, or no, he's not guilty. Like you're going to draw and capture things based on what you think. So if you did it for your own, just like as an experiment, just to practice, that would be interesting. But from a bias perspective, would be extremely challenging. Would be extremely challenging to be able to kind of put your own. I have to try to do that anyways in some work situations, try to put my bias aside. But, it is what it is. It's impossible to put all of your bias aside. And you just have to recognize that. As a professional, I try my best. When I'm in rooms, I do invite people to come up and challenge me on something I've written or add to it or change it or what have you, because I have to make sure that it's reflective and meaningful for the group. But if I feel like, oh, these people are super serious, I better not add in any little funny jokes, you know? How like I said earlier, I like to infuse humor. If I'm getting a feeling that that's not the right place and time to do that, then it's the illustration might be a little bit more have a corporate feel to it or something.
Right.
And that's okay. Sometimes that has its like place and time, right? But yeah, the notion and idea of the bias, I think, is something that you have to take into consideration and just recognize that we are all biased. We all have our own different types of bias, and we have to just try our best to be honoring the group and the people in it as much as possible.
Two thoughts on that, one about
Sure.
bias and one about perspective. So I
Mm,
wonder if a lawyer in this particular case would be interested in hiring people to do this, and maybe you get one, maybe you get a few different people to do it just
mm,
while they're in there listening to it, and then as the lawyer, or it could probably be used in other circumstances too, but in this situation a lawyer can look at it later when they're reviewing what happened in court that day or thinking about it, that they could look back at these and maybe get a different perspective and see those little details or those little
mm,
nuances that they didn't have time to pick up on when they were in court, but then they could see
right,
it, especially through the eyes of someone else. That
right.
I wonder, I bet that would help,
That would be
like
interesting. Yeah, I
get a legal
wonder.
strategy. Maybe try
Mhm.
selling that idea to some lawyers. I think there's another avenue there.
Yeah,
And
I do have people, like, who speakers at conferences and things that I've done a couple of times, and they like to use it as a reflection tool of their own speaking, right? So they'll say, "Oh, well, if Ashton didn't capture my main idea, then maybe it wasn't as, like, strong." And it's very
hmm,
kind of them to believe in my work that much. But some of them I'll even have conversations with afterwards, and I get to kind of verbalize what I heard and why I drew what I drew, and then they can use it as like, "Oh, did I get my main point across, or how did that flow, or how did those ideas connect? Where was she confused?" That kind of thing, to be able to increase their speaking engagements for the future. Yeah.
yeah, I think it's useful in all types of things where you would take notes and want to see how it was received by someone else, whether it was a book review or a movie
Yeah.
review or just in a regular meeting. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Yeah. Sorry, you were
The
going to say
other,
something about bias. I think I cut you
yep.
off there.
No, no, you're good. The other thing was the bias side. And I
Yeah.
wonder, I'm not trying to put you out of a job, but I
Okay, great.
wonder how much AI is
Mm,
going to affect something like this, where you could do a sketch note or a visual illustrator of just a meeting, and what AI would come up with if you prompted it the right way to do
mhm,
an illustration of a meeting. And I think that does raise the concern or show why people should think about it, of that bias of whatever you
mhm.
put into something could come out of it. Like if we're
Yeah.
just walking around like not that we're computers, but we learn things a certain way, and it seems like AI learns things like people learn them, except probably a lot faster. So we're just the same thing. The biases are built in to everything.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely something that I've been thinking a lot about, is kind of like AI in general, when it comes to my work. And the bias, definitely, like, I think we all have to recognize that, these generative AI programs where we type stuff in and get it to tell us things, they do have bias in them, right? We do have to recognize that. But from a potentially putting me out of a job, I guess, like, maybe eventually that could happen. But the one thing that you can't replace, which I think people appreciate more and more, especially since, like, we're in quote unquote post COVID times, is the importance and the value around human to human connection, right?
Mhm.
So even if you could take the audio or the whatever, plug it into something, and it can create some sort of visual or something that represents the information. that's only one piece of the pie when it comes to the human connection. That's just like focusing on the information and less about the nuance of when we are together, right? Because, like I said earlier, when I mentioned the humor part, you know, is the AI gonna pick up on, like, a subtle laughter or a clapping or a head nodding in agreement or things
Mm.
like that? Because whatever, I can't ever remember the percentages, but most of communication is nonverbal, right? So, is it gonna be
75%.
is it 75? There you go. I was gonna say 80,
Well,
but
you always say 75% of all communication is nonverbal.
right.
50% of all statistics are made up.
There you go.
That's
Yeah,
us.
so
So,
whatever it is. But I know it's very high. I know it's very
yeah.
high, um, when it comes to nonverbal communication. So there's aspects of what I do that, there's a couple of people in my field that are really freaked out, and I honor that fear. I think we all have things that we are worried about when it comes to the technology advancements, but I'm not really overly concerned from like, am I going to get out of a job anytime soon?
Mm.
Because, we all went virtual in COVID, but why are we back to in-person meetings and in-person conferences? Because I think it taught us even more so than from having, if we wouldn't have had that experience of having to be isolated at home, it taught us the importance even more so of human to human connection and the energy and the vibe and the relationship building that really can only come from being together and have togetherness. And my job, I feel like, is to elevate that connection, to help people feel even more connected and that engagement piece. So I'm not really concerned when it comes because that's sort of, ask me tomorrow and I might change my name, my mind.
Right.
But that's sort of how I feel about it today. Yes, I'm sure it's going to be able to do things that could replace some aspects of my work, but not not the foundational and most important, which is that human to human piece.
Yeah. I think AI could replace almost anybody doing anything because it's just like saying it's another person. It's You're trying to teach something to be more human. So eventually, if it becomes more human than human, then of course they can replace everything. With that view of in-person meetings versus online meetings, I think it's true in person makes a difference. But I think
Yeah.
a lot of the reason why you have in-person meetings again is also because the people that are in charge of other people they don't feel like they can control them as much when they're not right there. So
Right.
they want to bring them back into the office. I think it's probably a little mix of that and a little mix of the camaraderie of it. But you figure if you're in an office, you're probably working the same amount of time as you would at home if you're a person that, can stick to working. On average, I would say you're probably working the same amount of time and maybe even less in an office than you are at home because you're talking to so many different people about so many different things that it's
Mhm.
good for the human side of it, but for productivity, it may not be that great.
Right. Yeah,
But
I think it's like one of those things that it's so situational.
yeah,
Some
I
work
agree.
environments really must may need a lot of collaboration. So being in person is going to be important to be able to like have that meeting and get everybody together to talk about that thing for an hour might be more beneficial
Mhm.
than like talking on Slack all day long or something like that. But yeah, it's definitely, you know, um, I think people are understanding more and more the importance of like a healthy company culture, right? So I think we might just see a little bit more of that when it comes to like the great exodus or whatever people called it there a while ago. Like
Yeah.
everybody just started leaving their work. I'm like, there's a reason why people are doing that. And I think people are just a little bit more understand maybe some of the values that are non-negotiable for them. And I think that's a great thing. And companies are going to have to step up and realize that those pieces are important, especially to the younger people that are coming into the workforce and want to have more meaning in what it is that they're doing.
Yeah, it's a big swirl of things. Like if you were drawing a
Yeah.
picture of it, you'd definitely have corporate real estate, and then you'd have somebody lording over someone else, and then you'd have
Yeah.
camaraderie and feeling like you're part of a group. It's all mixed in together.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely complex for sure. Yeah.
Here's another idea for um, expansion of the business
Okay.
is because you can see the bias
Mm,
in yourself drawing things and you're aware of it, which is great. Then I wonder if visual note taking is something that could help AI learn better, because you play a
mm,
meeting or a situation for an AI to learn, and then you do your thing, and
mm,
maybe you get it from a different perspective of 10 or 20 different people during visual notes on the same meeting,
mm,
and then somehow you use it as prompts for the AI, and you
mm.
might get a more sense of humor based or a perspective that's a little bit different, and an AI could look at it and go, "Oh, okay, yeah, that's good. I like that way. Some people might like this way. Other people might like." Because I think you have to approach
Right.
AI like you're teaching a human. Like
Right.
you don't want to teach a human just one way. Unless you want them to be factory workers, in which case you put them in regular education and tell them not to take visual notes.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, it is definitely curious. I know that like these large language models are trained on millions and millions of data points, right? So I guess it would make sense that it could be similar in terms of like we're going to give you thousands or millions of visuals in these contexts, um, and if you could pair the audio or something with it or
Yeah,
written something or whatever, it would be interesting. And, you know, who knows, maybe that's already someone's already working behind the scenes to do something like that. But
they are
um,
now.
they are now. But yeah, I guess it kind of all comes down to, I think, too, is what's the purpose, right? If you can just plug something into AI and get it after the fact, if that's good enough for you, then that's great. But if you want people to be able to see their um, thinking in real time from a human perspective, you
Hmm.
know, then you can like talk to the human and be like, "Oh, why did you draw that?" I'll be like, "This is why," and be like, "Oh, well, actually, this," and like, "Oh, okay," you know, and you know, because corrections and changes on the fly are just as important as like the original writing down or drawing pictures of something, right? And being able to have a dialogue, which, you know,
I like your
being
defense of humanity.
I it is, you know, it's just what I've experienced for so long that you can't get away from it. It's just people people just need people, right?
Mm.
And if those are the I think the situations where we're going to find ourselves um just spending more time and understanding. And I think people are I'm kind of curious. I feel like people are going to be more critical. Be like, "Did you write this? Or did an AI write this?" And
Mm.
people are gonna value something that's written or drawn or something by a person, right? I think that's gonna be a checkbox on things soon. That's my,
Yeah,
hypothesis is like, did an AI write this book? Did an
the
AI
humans.
draw this picture, right? And if they find out that, oh, it was just Midjourney or ChatGPT or what have you, people might be like, okay, it's like you cheated too much. We don't
It's the
appreciate it as
it's
much."
it's the dividing lines of the future. The humans are going to like human stuff. The computers are going to like computer things.
Yeah.
I just wonder if it's a whole cycle to where humans create computers, c- computers create this what we would call artificial intelligence, but then computers want to become more human, and then you just have this cycle. I guess they covered that in Battlestar Galactica the second time we referenced that in this, but I don't know. It's
The way I
interesting.
see it is, the way I see it is a little bit of the Facebook situation, right? Facebook came out, everyone thought it was the best thing ever for a long time. We were like, "This is
Mm.
amazing. It's awesome. Look at us connecting." And then at some point, people started questioning, is this like
Mm.
social? Like, are we actually connecting more or less? Right? People started
Mm.
to question how social is social media, or is it just like And now I get to compare my life to yours, and now I feel crappy about my life because it doesn't look as exciting as yours or what have you. And social media, I think, has started to make people feel worse about their life and less connected than what it was intended for. So then you see a lot of like young people being like, why would I do all this social media stuff? Like, I feel like there's like this bit of this exodus, a bit of social media, right? So
Hmm.
my hypothesis is that that's probably going to happen. There's going to be hype for a long time, and then probably at some point, people will start to be like, is this actually helping us? Or is it just distracting us from like actual reality in life, and living
Hmm.
in life, is it helping us or not in the way that it was originally intended, right? So that I don't
Well,
know. Who knows? Who knows? That's how I think things will shake out over
you could
time.
also look at social media as the purpose of it being to sell you something and control you. But
Well, yeah,
maybe
yeah.
that's a
So you could say the same thing for AI eventually, I
yeah.
think too, right? Like if you want to access the real good stuff, you got to pay for it, right?
Hmm.
And then that's just segregating, so like the people who can pay for it will be able to access it, and then people will be frustrated about that, right? Because
Hmm.
it's not accessible to all, right?
Yeah.
Right. It's like, yeah, I was watching this one person, she talks about like disabilities. And she's like, you know, smart devices have made people with disabilities be able to access the world in a lot easier way, but at what cost? Right. Now, all these people who are disabled who might not have as much money, can they afford all the smart devices to be able to help them access the world a little bit more easier? Right? So
Hmm.
it's like we create these things and we say, "Oh, now everything's accessible," but is it really? Like accessibility is something that I'm really passionate about too. Like how are things actually accessible? Like on surface level, yeah, okay, but is it actually accessible is the question, right?
It sounds like the age old mo money, mo problems.
Yeah, possibly, yeah.
Yeah. What do you think about hieroglyphics?
I refer to them from time to time, as like we've been drawing our ideas forever, you know, cave paintings, hieroglyphics, all those things. We've been communicating visually way before words, right? I think that just solidifies the message of why pictures are important and how we communicate and how we should be still using pictures to do so.
I saw um, I guess it's a documentary or just a show about the Mayan language and how
Mm.
it mixed hieroglyphics with sounds. And
Oh,
that's how they
interesting.
finally cracked the code of it because they couldn't understand it before. And it was a kid that did it, a younger kid. But there's a bunch of scientists, but a kid was also involved. So they brought this fresh perspective of looking at words the way they did. I think the kid was the son of one of the archaeologists or whatever you call them that was looking at these Mayan hieroglyphics. And they found that it was a picture, but also within that picture, it was broken up into syllables or sounds of the words. And is a new way of looking at hieroglyphics, I think, because you think of the Egyptian ones where just like this picture means this or this person's doing this. But thinking more about the visual illustration, that seems like that's what hieroglyphs are because you could go
Right.
through a whole story and you're like, whoa, how did you get that from this picture? But it's like, well, I was at the meeting where
Yeah.
they drew this, so I
Yeah.
know what it means.
Right. Yeah. No, I love that idea around that. That's very cool.
Hieroglyphics. Do you, how much have you seen your business change since you started within the past 10 years of just the way people receive it or the way you operate?
Um, Interesting question. I think it has a lot of similarities. I've just been able to understand the value more and be able to communicate that to people. Um, where in the beginning, every rejection felt like a stab in the heart, and they were saying no
Mm.
to my creativity. Instead, now I can phrase it in a way of like, oh, that's too bad, because I know people in the room would really value from it or benefit from it because of the value that it provides to people. And I see it more as an unfortunate circumstance if someone doesn't want to invest in it. Um, and that confidence just comes with time and experience and being able to hear stories from people in a room and how it's helped them. So, my drawing style has evolved. The visuals that I create for people has definitely improved. Like stuff I've created even just like a year or two ago. Visually, not as nice looking as it is today. Um, but I feel like that's just something minor when it comes to more of the value of it that I've been able to kind of experience. And when you are able to do the work and get people to clearly tell you how it's helping them, that just kind of helps you be able to take that into your future work projects too, and be able to use those stories to show how it could help them too. Yeah.
What other creative pursuits do you involve yourself in?
Yeah, doing my own creative projects has definitely taken a bit of a back burner. It's something that I really wanted to focus a little bit more into next year and doing some of my own things. It has taken a bit of a backseat, but I am currently learning how to play the bagpipes with my 10-year-old. Um, so it's I've learned a lot of instruments in my life, and the bagpipes is quite a unique one. And we're just doing it for fun. So it's yeah, that's one creative pursuit that I'm working on right now.
It sounds like a good thing to do when it's cold outside and everyone's trapped inside. Just get out the pipes.
Yeah, I love that. Cool. Yeah.
All right. Any ideas or thoughts you have in closing? Definitely appreciate you taking your time to talk today.
Yeah, no, thanks so much for having me. It was really awesome. I'm always just really jazzed when I'm able to talk to someone who ended up being such a kindred spirit in how we like look at the world, but also asking really unique and challenging questions as well. So, um, yeah, I appreciate you and thank you for the time today.
Yeah, I like the idea of the visual representation of a conversation better or a meeting. And I think it's very useful. I didn't know much about it before I started looking into what you did. And I wish I knew about it a lot sooner, because it's those things that when you're going on a creative venture, I always found myself doing more of a mind map for pre-writing. So
Yeah.
rudimentary sketch notes, I would call it, because really you're just doing words, but you're putting them in different places on the page and maybe in a
Mhm.
circle or a square just to get your ideas straight. And I think I did fall victim to the public education of don't doodle, just write the notes. And
Right.
I feel sorry about that now, but you got to get some of that back. So I'm definitely going to practice my sketchnoting, and I'll follow your social media stuff, not because you're trying to sell me anything or because of control, but just because I want to learn about it.
No, I love that. I appreciate that. Yeah, thanks so much for the chat today.
All right. I'll put in the show notes, we'll have all your links. And thank you very much for being here. I'll talk to
Yeah,
you at the other side of this. Okay.
sounds great.
All right.